Boston, Massachusetts. 2007 was a year of contrasts in Boston, Massachusetts. The city was at a time of economic prosperity, with new developments and a growing technology sector, but there was also a darkness lurking in the private lives of its residents. Between the historic facades and modern glass towers, a story of love, obsession, and betrayal was about to unfold in tragic fashion. As children, Lucas, James, and David were inseparable. Growing up in a quiet neighborhood in Boston, the three met when they were still very young, around 7 years old. Their friendship began at a small local elementary school, where they quickly came into their own as a close-knit, inseparable trio. Lucas was the natural leader of the group. He was charismatic, outgoing, and had a contagious energy that attracted people around him. He always had a new idea for adventures, whether it was building a fort in the backyard or creating an innovative game of hide and seek. His friends admired him for his creativity and initiative. James, on the other hand, was more reserved and introspective. He had a passion for books and spent a lot of time reading, which made him stand out for his intelligence and curiosity. He was the thinker of the group, often offering a thoughtful and sensible perspective on Lucas's boldest ideas. David was the peacemaker. He had a calm and friendly manner, and was known for his ability to unite others around common activities. His kind and empathetic nature made him the friend everyone trusted for support and understanding. He also had a natural talent for sports, which made him popular at school physical activities. Together, the three made a perfect team. They were often seen playing football in the local park, exploring new areas and inventing games. Their friendship was marked by laughter, adventure, and a deep sense of loyalty. During these years, they shared dreams and promises about the future, believing that nothing could separate them. As they moved into high school, things began to change. Their friendship was still strong, but adolescence brought new challenges and complexities. The school was now larger and more diverse, and each began to develop in different directions. Lucas continued to be a leader, but his confidence and charisma began to transform into something more intense. He was known for being the most popular in school, always surrounded by a large number of friends and admirers. His need for attention and approval became a defining characteristic, and his influence grew. James excelled academically and became an exemplary student. His interest in literature and philosophy led him to become involved in academic clubs and debates, where his analytical skills were highly appreciated. He began to socially distance himself from sports and more social activities, focusing on his academic future. David, who was once the peacemaker, began to feel pressured by the changing dynamic between him and his friends. He was still the person who brought the group together, but now he found himself in a more passive role, struggling to maintain balance between the different personalities that emerged. He became involved in sports and community service activities, looking for a way to express his own identity. The friendship triangle became more complex as time went on. Lucas and James began to grow apart, each following their own path and interests. David, although still friends with both of them, found himself in a difficult position, trying to keep their friendship alive while dealing with his own insecurities. Lucas was often involved in romantic and social relationships, seeking validation and attention. James was deeply involved in his academic pursuits and his pursuit of knowledge, which led him to spend more time in solitary pursuits. David, on the other hand, struggled to balance his social and academic life, feeling increasingly isolated as his friends went their separate ways. The dynamic between the three friends began to change significantly during their senior year of high school. The growing distance and different priorities began to create fissures in the friendship that once seemed unbreakable. Lucas and David began to feel excluded from James' world, and the tension between them increased. Competition and jealousy began to emerge, especially as Lucas fell in love with James, a feeling he struggled to hide. David, who had always had a strong connection with Lucas, began to notice the change in his friend's behavior and felt torn between supporting Lucas and maintaining his friendship with James. In their final year of high school, the relationship between the three friends reached a critical point. The love triangle that had formed was now a source of constant tension. Unexpressed feelings and unresolved insecurities began to affect their interactions, creating an environment full of jealousy and misunderstandings. Despite the changes and challenges, The three friends' childhoods were always marked by a strong sense of connection and loyalty. Memories of school days, adventures, and shared promises formed the basis of their friendship, even when things began to fall apart. Lucas, James, and David's childhood was a time of genuine happiness and companionship. They were united by shared dreams and experiences, and this connection was fundamental to the formation of their identities. However, as they grew up and faced the complexities of adulthood, their friendship was tested in ways neither of them anticipated. What began as an innocent and joyful friendship turned into a complex web of feelings and rivalries. The transition from childhood to adolescence brought to the surface questions of identity, jealousy, and obsession that would eventually lead to tragedy. Memories of his childhood would be remembered with a mixture of longing and regret, a reminder of a simpler time that now seemed distant and unattainable. The beginning of everything. On January 5, 2007, James, David, and Lucas met at a local bar to celebrate the start of the new year. The three had been friends since college and had a connection that many envied. James, aged 28, was a promising young lawyer, always elegant and reserved about his personal life. David, aged 27, was an aspiring writer, known for his charisma and creativity. Lucas, the youngest at 26, worked as a graphic artist and was the most extroverted of the group. Friendship and secrets. Their friendship seemed solid, but it hid deep secrets. James and David had begun a secret relationship, something they decided to keep out of Lucas's eyes. Although her friendship with Lucas was genuine, they both feared how he would react if he discovered the truth. Lucas, on the other hand, has always had an attraction to James, but never had the courage to express his feelings, believing that a strong friendship was better than risking losing everything. As the months passed, the relationship between James and David intensified, and keeping Luke's secret became increasingly difficult. In March 2007, Lucas began to notice subtle changes in his friend's behavior. Looks exchanged, whispers, and muffled laughter made him suspect something was happening. He began to watch his friends more closely, feeling increasingly excluded and betrayed. Lucas wasn't just a jealous friend. He was becoming obsessive. Her unrequited love for James fueled a growing anger towards David. He began following James and David, trying to uncover the truth. His suspicions were confirmed one night in March when he saw them kissing in the park where they used to meet. The initial shock turned into cold, calculated determination. He believed that if David was no longer in the way, James would finally see him differently. Tension increases. From that moment on, the tension between the three friends only increased. James, trying to keep the peace, minimized David's concerns, who was beginning to feel something was wrong. Lucas, on the other hand, was increasingly unstable. His obsession consumed him, and he began to plan how to get rid of David. In May 2007, the atmosphere between them was unbearable. James and David tried to live their relationship discreetly, while Lucas became increasingly isolated, hatching his plan. He began sending anonymous messages to David, threatening him and trying to intimidate him out of the way. A worried David shared his suspicions with James, who couldn't believe Lucas was capable of something so extreme. In March 2007, tension between the three friends reached its peak. Lucas, driven by his suspicions and growing obsession, finally confronted James. They were at a coffee shop in downtown Boston, a place they used to frequent together, but the once friendly atmosphere was filled with tension. Lucas couldn't take the uncertainty any longer and decided it was time to expose his suspicions. "James, we need to talk. There's something you're hiding from me, and I can't ignore it anymore," Lucas said, staring into James' eyes. James, taken by surprise, tried to remain calm, but knew he could no longer hide the truth. "Lucas, I have something to confess," James began, hesitating. "David and I are together. We've been dating for a few months." The revelation came as a shock to Lucas. He was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. Feelings of betrayal, anger, and sadness consumed him. He had always had an attraction to James, and now he felt like his world was falling apart. Lucas tried to maintain his composure, but inside he was devastated. "Why didn't you tell me, James? I'm your friend. How could you keep this from me?" He felt a mixture of pain and fury. James's revelation not only confirmed his suspicions, but also ignited a dangerous obsession. "I didn't want to hurt you, Lucas. I didn't think you would understand," James explained, visibly uncomfortable, but Lucas couldn't hear anymore. From that moment on, something inside him changed. He was determined to do something about it. Lucas's obsession with James grew every day. He began watching the couple, discreetly following them to better understand their relationship. Lucas collected information, kept photos and messages he found, fueling his anger and his desire to separate them. He began spying on James and David, observing their interactions and trying to find a way to intervene. Lucas believed that if David was no longer in the way, he could finally win James' love. Every day, his obsession became more intense and dangerous. In May 2007, the tension between the friends was unbearable. James and David tried to live their relationship discreetly, but they felt the weight of Lucas's looks and suspicions. David, especially, was increasingly concerned about Lucas' behavior. He felt something was wrong, but James, trying to keep the peace, minimized his boyfriend's concerns. "He's just going through a difficult time," James would say, trying to reassure David. "Lucas has always been emotionally intense. He'll get over it." But David wasn't convinced. He noticed the changes in Lucas' behavior, the way he watched them, the looks filled with jealousy and anger. David knew Lucas was becoming a threat, but he couldn't convince James to take more drastic measures. As the months passed, Luke devised a meticulous plan to get rid of David. He believed that without David, James would finally realize his feelings. Lucas began sending anonymous messages to David, trying to intimidate him and push him away. The messages were disturbing, full of veiled threats and accusations. "You don't belong here, David. James is mine," one message read. David, increasingly distraught, shared the messages with James, who was still reluctant to believe that Lucas could be behind it. "That doesn't sound like Lucas," James insisted. "He wouldn't do something like that." In July 2007, Lucas decided it was time to act. He invited David to a secret meeting, promising to reveal something important about James. David, although reluctant, agreed to meet with Lucas, hoping to clear up the situation once and for all. On July 15, 2007, Lucas found David in a secluded park, away from prying eyes. What was supposed to be a conversation turned into a confrontation. Lucas, armed with a knife, attacked David, stabbing him repeatedly. David tried to fight, but Lucas was determined to end his life. Following Luke's arrest and the discovery of David's body, the city of Boston was plunged into a state of shock and mourning. David's brutal murder shook the local community, and news spread quickly, generating a wave of outrage and sadness. Local media covered the case extensively, with sensational headlines detailing the betrayal and jealousy that led to the tragedy. James was surrounded by reporters and cameras as he left the crime scene. He was devastated, his eyes red and full of tears. The pain of losing David was palpable, and the pressure from the media only worsened his suffering. He withdrew from the public, trying to find some kind of solace amidst the chaos. Lucas' trial began in December 2007, just months after the murder. The courtroom was full of journalists, family members and onlookers, all eager to hear the details of the case. Lucas, now a man marred by regret and stress, entered the courtroom with an expression of resignation. His defense tried to argue that he had acted under strong emotional influence and was in a state of mental disturbance. However, the evidence against him was irrefutable. The threatening messages sent to David, James' testimony, and the details of the crime described a clear pattern of obsession and jealousy. Lucas confessed to his crime and expressed regret, but his confession did not ease the pain of his actions. In court, the judge considered all factors, and in January 2008, Lucas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was received with a mixture of relief and sadness. Although there was a desire for justice, the reality of David's loss could never be reversed. James faced a long and painful grieving process. The loss of David left him deeply shaken, and he struggled to find a sense of normalcy in his life. He withdrew from his friends and the media, seeking support from a small group of close friends and therapy. The pain of betrayal and loss was constant, and James found himself struggling with deep depression. To deal with his grief, James dedicated himself to creating a foundation in David's memory, focused on offering psychological and emotional support to people facing mental health problems and abusive relationships. The foundation not only honored David's memory, but also served as a means for James to find some purpose and meaning in the midst of suffering. The case had a lasting impact on the Boston community. The park where David was murdered was temporarily closed and, after reopening, received a memorial in his honor, with a plaque and a bench dedicated to the young man whose life was brutally cut short. Local organizations and mental health support groups used the case as an example to raise awareness about the dangers of jealousy and obsession. Lectures, seminars, and community campaigns were held to educate people on how to recognize signs of destructive behavior and seek help before the situation became irreversible. James and David's families also faced great challenges. David's family was devastated by the loss, and grieving was a long and difficult process. They tried to keep David's memory alive through community events and fundraising activities for the foundation created in his honor. James' family offered unconditional support, helping him cope with the trauma and rebuild his life. Together, they faced the impact of the tragedy and worked to create an environment of love and support. The case of David, James, and Luke is a grim reminder of the extremes to which human emotions can lead. The love triangle that began with friendship and secrets ended in a devastating tragedy. Lucas' obsession and jealousy resulted in a brutal crime, destroying lives and deeply affecting everyone involved. The Boston community, as well as the families and friends of the three, had to deal with the consequences of a tragedy that defied comprehension. The pain and grief were palpable, but the community's response, through support and education, sought to transform the tragedy into something positive. The case of David, James, and Lucas stands as a warning about the importance of recognizing and treating emotional problems before they turn into something irreparable. David's memory and the legacy created by James serve as a reminder that even in the midst of tragedy, there is room for hope and change.